Coin lovers of the world, welcome to Dallas, welcome to Heritage. And I'm here today, this morning here in Dallas, this evening in another part of the world with my dear friend, James Croock, who today is going to, I'm going to talk to him a little bit about the fantastic, wonderful Gatsby collection that he's put together over the last several decades. James has been a good friend of Heritage for many years. I think we were just discussing this before we got started. I think we met in person the first time when we did the Shoshana preview in London. At the time, he was sort of commuting into London back and forth. And, James has been able to accomplish something that's quite unusual these days in collecting, which is he completed a collection. And he's going to talk a little bit more about that. But hey, James, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me and to talk about the Gatsby collection, which, part one is coming up just in about a month from now.
Thanks, Chris. Very pleased to be able to chat with you in this way.
Okay, wonderful, James. So, why don't we get started by telling everybody how you first became interested in South African coins specifically, because tell us a bit about your background and why South African became so important to you.
Well, when I was a youngster in South Africa, aged 8 or 9, I started collecting stamps and coins, and I persuaded my father to take me to some of the auctions that took place in the evenings, and I started collecting in a haphazard way and swapping and trying to build up a bit of a collection. And I gradually focused on coins, and particularly South Africa and British coins. Right. But British coins extended over such a long period and such a huge range of coins. Yeah. And there were so many very good collections that I thought it was more sensible to concentrate on something which was then closer at hand, which was in South Africa. So I started collecting South African coins, and I had a real interest in history and geography, which aligned well with collecting coins, and that's how it started. So I focused on the early coins of the Boer republics, and then moved on to the coins of South Africa between 1923 and 1960.
That's fantastic. And James, before we tell everybody how the collection is going to be presented at auction coming up, tell me your top 3 favorite items in your collection and why, if you can.
Absolutely.
One seems to be obvious.
No, it's quite a difficult question in some respects, but I'm going to confine my response to a selection of 3 from the coins that are being offered in New York at the Heritage Auction in January. And the first coin is the Burger's Pont, the coarse beard. And that's because it was the first coin minted at the instruction of a South African government. That was President Thomas Francois Burger, who arranged for that coin to be minted. And it was produced from the first gold that had been discovered and mined in South Africa, in the Transvaal as it then was. It was discovered in around about 1869 and the early 1870s. So it's a fascinating coin. It's the first of its kind. It's scarce, and this particular one is a spectacular condition one.
Explain to everybody what coarse beard means.
Well, there were 2 versions of this coin because there was some issue with the way in which it was struck, and there are 2 versions. There's the fine beard and the coarse beard, and the coarse beard is the more scarce of the 2. In fact, it was only, I think, in the 1940s when some research was done that it was appreciated that there were 2 variations of this coin. Yes. And this is the scarcer version and a very fine example. So that's my first choice.
Sure. Okay.
Moving on to the next 2, they both relate to the Anglo-Boer War that was fought between 1899 and 1902. Yes. And I think it may just be worth mentioning briefly that background because it's relevant to understanding the significance of these coins. The Anglo-Boer War was a very tragic and devastating war that was fought between the British and the Boers between 1899 and 1902. It caused a lot of devastation, and it was much more difficult, costly, and destructive than the British had anticipated. And ultimately, they prevailed through sheer force of numbers and resources, but also by resorting to some rather unpleasant tactics, which eventually broke the spirit of the Boers. And the two coins that I have from that period in this choice of three are the single 9 overstamp of the 1898 pond. Now, this is the unique unicorn crown jewel in the South African coin collection, firmament, if I can put it that way. And it had to be struck with an overstamp because the dies that had been prepared in Germany and shipped to South Africa to go to Pretoria to enable the mint there to use the dies had been intercepted by a cloak and dagger operation by the British in Delagoa Bay. And so, desperate to produce coins with the 99 date on them, the mint came up with this idea. And the first coin was struck with a single 9. It was too big, and it was decided to use two smaller 9s. And that's what followed. But the interesting thing about the single 9 is that it was presented by the Boer authorities to the US consul in Pretoria, Charles McCrum, who was a known to be sympathetic to the Boer cause. The other interesting feature about this coin and the personalities involved is that Winston Churchill was a reporter sent out to South Africa at the time of the Boer War, and he was captured by the Boers and imprisoned in Pretoria. His family were very concerned about him, and so they prevailed upon a US senator to send a message to McCrum to find out what had happened to their relative Winston. And McCrum called at the jail and met with Churchill. And Churchill mentions this in the book that he wrote about his experiences at the time. And he says that it was clear that McCrum was not very sympathetic to the British, but he did let his family know that he was well. And it's sort of remarkable that the coin that links in some ways the US consul with Churchill and the Boer Republic ended up with King Farouk before it returned to South African collectors in the 50s. So that's my second coin.
Yeah, let me just mention, James, and not only is it an icon of South African numismatics, of course, it's an icon of all numismatics. It's one of the wonderful, as you describe, an incredibly historically important item that's got great significance and great long provenance. And, for people, there's a lot of, a lot of collectors these days that are what we call trophy hunters. And, I can't think of a greater trophy than this one as it relates to not only, like I said, not only South African or African numismatics, but world numismatics, because it connects, the history is really all webbed into the world, and it's not just local, it's global. So it's an incredibly interesting, we're very honored to be able to offer this to our audience and to everybody. Thank you for that.
And thank you. And I'm very honored to have had stewardship of that coin for a period. It really is quite
and your
special.
Third one?
It's the Veldpond, the 1902 Veldpond. This was a coin struck towards the end of the war in the field, i.e. a siege coin, when the Boers were in great difficulty. They needed to purchase provisions. They couldn't use paper money. They managed to accumulate some gold and struck these coins in great difficulty. Circumstances were tricky, and they had to be done on the hoof, as it were. And what's been created is a really beautiful, emblematic coin, a very poignant coin, because it was the last coin struck just before the war came to an end. And it was another 21 years before any more coins were struck in South Africa. And it's really quite a beautiful and special piece.
I agree, and Tommy has been putting images of these coins that we've been discussing. I mean, that's and the felt pond is one that we can really see the struggle. It's one coin that you can really see the history happening on it, because it is it's so iconic and so different, and again, it's another item, another trophy, in the sense that it's something that everybody recognizes when you see it. It's unique in the sense of the way it looks and the way that you see sort of the siege and the war happening as these coins were being made, and as as everything was happening. So it's wonderful. I like your selections. They might have been the same as mine. If I were to select, maybe I'll go through that exercise later on. But you've been collecting now for several decades, James. How do you see over these decades and coming into 2025 now with your collection? And how do you see the changes in collecting and how we've got to where we are now?
So I've been collecting for nearly, or at least 6 decades. So I've seen some enormous changes, but the key ones, I think, are the development of the internet, and the increasing use of the internet, and the increasing use of the numismatic grading services. And the consequence of that is that an enormous amount of data, price intelligence,
That's right.
History and so on is available to collectors, and also available in a much more accessible, legible, attractive form. And that's created a very sophisticated marketplace. And the rating agencies have introduced an element of certainty and objectivity into the process.
Yes.
So that it's a little less subjective and emotional. And those are big changes. I think the other thing I would note is that there's been, particularly in relation to South African coins, some more recent publications, books, reference material with fascinating research, history, illustrations, and in particular, Professor Francois Milan has produced some excellent materials, and that's, I think, adding to the interest that people will have in South African coins. I think the only drawback, if I can put it that way, over the years is in the early days when I went to these auctions, there would be a collection of slightly eccentric collectors who would come along. They all knew each other. They all knew the auctioneer. And there would be some witty repartee trying to extract bids from people. And that's kind of gone, although I think now the younger generation probably engage in this online in a way that I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, no, you're right. Sort of the event of the auction, right? Sort of that coming together in on the floor of the auction has changed, has shifted to the internet. Often we have 2 or 3 on the floor, and then we have 300 online watching. So, the globalization of collection has taken place certainly over the years, and heritage and the grading service and everything. And I couldn't agree more. It opened the doors and opened the world to collecting, and people to do sight unseen bidding and things like that. So as I'm sure there will be lots of when we get together January 13th with part 1 of Gatsby. So talking about Gatsby specifically, why the great Gatsby name? Why that name? Please tell us.
So when I was a student at university, one of the books that I studied was The Great Gatsby by Scott Fitzgerald, which interested me, and I was very impressed by it. And I mentioned it to my parents and recommended that they read it. And they did read it, and they liked it. And I think they saw something in the Gatsby character that connected them to my approach to coin collecting. I think they saw in Gatsby someone who had a passionate interest in something, who slightly obsessive, determined to pursue his interest and to track down things that appealed to him. And they encouraged me in those early days in a modest way to continue with my collecting. And I think that in recognition of their early encouragement, and because they gave me the name Gatsby is a nickname, which I rather liked,
Yes.
I decided to use that name for my collection. So it became the Gatsby Collection.
Fantastic, memorable pedigree that will be remembered for decades to come. With because they're your legacy in collecting South African coins is going to go on for many decades. People will refer to it, will refer to your catalog, because, as I said, you've accomplished something that's quite unusual. That you've put together basically a complete set of South African coins, and that's beautiful. It's sort of a testament to the work that you've done over the past 6 decades. So, so finally, before we go, why did you decide to sell it now? Why now? It's a conversation that you and I have had over the years, and I have it with many collectors. It's a personal decision, the timing of it, and it's always a complex decision. So why now, and why did you pick Heritage to present your collection?
So there's never an ideal time to sell. I've been collecting for more than 6 decades, and it's really quite a wrench to part with a collection. But I think that you get to the point where you feel you've collected everything that you really want to collect. There's really no particular item that I would still want to add to the collection. And I feel that it's the right time to enable other people to acquire pieces that they may want to enhance their collection or to build on their collection. And I also feel a responsibility to deal with the disposal of quite a substantial collection, rather than to leave it to my executors to have to grapple with the difficulties. And
Absolutely.
actually, it links into the reason why I chose Heritage, because we've had a long relationship. I regard Heritage as the premier auction house for numismatic materials. And I feel if you're going to sell something, you need to work with people you like, you trust, you can rely on. And we've had a good long-term relationship. And I think the resources that Heritage has, the technical ability to produce exceptional catalogs, to do the research, to deal with the security of handling these very large and sometimes very valuable collections, and the database of collectors is really unrivaled. And you and your colleagues have been a pleasure to work with, and you have the expertise that is really essential to be able to handle these in the most effective way. And so it's really wasn't much of a choice, although I did go through a process of deciding carefully who I would use. And so I'm pleased it's not going in one go, and we'll have a chance to continue working together through 2025.
That's right, and so we're incredibly honored. I mean, it's especially it gives me special joy when it's a collection that, from somebody who I considered a friend and I've known over the years, and have worked together and helped and advised a little bit, and phone bid with you when at times, meeting at lot viewing, and you visiting Dallas, et cetera, over the years. It's been great. And it's been, for the whole team, everybody that has been working on the production of your catalog, it's been a joy just to see your coins. I know that NGC had a great time certifying everything. So, and of course, you're causing a great, the buzz in the South African collecting world, and the world peripheral to that is gigantic right now, as you know, and the expectations for the auctions are wonderful. January 13th, of course, New York, at the New York International. We're going to do part 1. It's actually already online on preview, opening in the next few days. Everybody can go in to CHA.com/3121. Gatsby Collection, and then we're going to have part 2 coming in the summer, in August at the ANA, and then we'll have an additional third part as a showcase dedicated just to the Gatsby Collection for the items of more simple value. So, but tune into part 1, HA.com/3121. James, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. We're going to be talking again, of course, for the next couple of months and having fun. And best of luck to us in the auction. And any final words?
No, thanks so much, Cris. I wish you and your colleagues continued success and look forward to working with you over the coming months. And thanks for this opportunity.
Thanks, James.